Daniel's voice filled the entire room that afternoon. Not loud. That was the worst part. He wasn't shouting. He was calm, the way a man is calm when he has already decided the outcome of a conversation and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. "Mom, you gave us that money as a gift," he said. "You said so yourself. We have nothing to pay back, and honestly, after everything we've done for you, I think you should be grateful we even let you live here." The room went very quiet. There were 7 people in attorney David Park's conference room that afternoon. David himself, seated at the head of the table, his pen hovering above a yellow legal pad. My former colleague Carolyn Trin, sitting 2 chairs to my left, her hands folded in her lap. Mr. Arthur Ngo, who had driven himself across the city at 78 years old and was now sitting perfectly straight in a gray linen shirt, as if he were attending something formal, something that mattered. And Vivian, Daniel's wife, she sat beside him with her fingers laced together on the tabletop, her expression arranged into something that was almost sympathy. Almost. The way a loan officer arranges her face when she is about to explain why your application has been denied. I looked at my son. He was 41 years old. He had his father's jaw and his father's shoulders and none of his father's shame. I smiled. It was a small smile, one corner of my mouth, barely a movement at all. I had spent 35 years in a classroom. I had learned in those years that the most powerful thing a teacher can do is wait. Let the silence do its work. Let the student hear his own words echoing back from the walls. Daniel glanced at Vivian. She looked down at her hands. No one in that room except perhaps Arthur understood why I was smiling. Let me take you back to where this began. 11 months earlier, on a Tuesday in late October, Daniel came to visit me at the house on Phan Din Phung Street. I had lived in that house for 32 years. My husband Min had died in the back bedroom, with the window open so he could hear the rain, and I had kept that window slightly open ever since on rainy nights out of a habit I had no desire to break. The altar in the front room still held his photograph, the one from our wedding anniversary, the year he turned 50, when he still smiled easily and his hair was still mostly black. I burned incense there every morning. It was the first thing I did before I made tea. Before I opened the shutters. Before I did anything else. Daniel arrived at 10:30. He came alone, which I noticed. He and Vivian usually traveled in formation, the way people do when they have rehearsed something together. He sat down at the kitchen table and accepted the tea I poured him and said nothing for a moment, just held the cup with both hands. He used to do that as a boy, hold his cup with both hands. Some things do not change. "Ma," he said, "Vivian and I have been looking at a house." I waited. In District 2, a good neighborhood, good schools, for when later, he set his cup down. "The price is right, better than anything we'll see again." "How much?" I asked. 95,000. I looked at him. He was looking at the table. "We don't have enough saved," he said. "The bank will give us the rest, but we need 95 to make the down payment work." "We've looked everywhere, Ma. There's no other way." I did not speak immediately. I looked at the altar in the next room, at the curl of incense smoke rising in the still air of the house, thin and patient. I thought about the money. It was not money I had lying idle. It was 35 years of classroom salaries and careful living. Of buying vegetables at the end of the market day when the prices dropped. Of repairing shoes instead of replacing them. Of a retirement that was supposed to belong only to me. But he was my son. "I will give you the money," I said. His face changed. Relief, yes. But something else moved underneath it. Quick and gone. Like a fish turning in dark water. "I'll write it down," I said. A promissory note. The amount, the date, the terms. "You and Vivian will sign." He looked up. "Ma, we're family. You don't need to." "I taught English for 35 years, I said. "I taught my students that words matter. Written words matter more." I stood and went to the drawer beside the stove where I kept paper. This is not distrust. This is love with a clear head. He was quiet while I wrote. My handwriting was still what it had always been, careful, even, the letters properly formed, the way I had taught 3 decades of students to form them. When I finished, I read it aloud to him. $95,000, Repayment within 5 years. No interest. His name. Vivian's name. The date. He signed without reading it again. I folded the paper in half, then in half again, and placed it inside an envelope. I sealed the envelope and wrote Carolyn Trin's address on the front. "I'll have Arthur witness it," I said, "and then I'll give it to Carolyn to keep." Daniel laughed, a short sound, not quite easy. "You're serious." "I am always serious about money," I said, "and I am always serious about family." I called Arthur that same evening. He came the next morning in his good shirt, the white one with the small collar, and he read the document slowly and carefully the way he had read everything in 40 years of notary work, and then he watched Daniel and Vivian sign. And then he wrote his own name beneath theirs, with the same unhurried care. I handed the sealed envelope to Carolyn 3 days later. She held it in both hands. "You want me to keep this?" she asked. "Don't open it," I said. "Don't move it. Just keep it somewhere safe and dry." She put it in her filing cabinet, in the very back, behind a folder labeled Taxes 2019. That was 11 months ago. Now I sat in Attorney David Park's conference room and listened to my son tell 7 witnesses that the $95,000 had been a gift, that I had said so myself, that I should be grateful he still allowed me to live in the house I had owned for 32 years. I kept my smile exactly where it was. My father used to say, "Still water runs deepest." He meant it about people. He meant it about patience. He meant it about the kind of strength that does not announce itself, that simply sits in the current and waits, holding everything it holds, until the moment when holding is no longer necessary. I had been still water my entire life. Today, the current was about to change. Min always said the house on Fondin Fung Street had good bones. He said it the first time we walked through it together, 32 years ago, when the walls were still the pale yellow of old custard and the floorboards creaked in the second room near the window, and the kitchen smelled of whoever had lived there before us. He knocked on the walls with his knuckles the way his father had taught him, listening for something I could not hear. Then he nodded. "Good bones," he said. "Everything else can be fixed." He was right about that. He was right about most things, in the quiet way of a man who did not need to be told so. We spent the first 3 months fixing. Min retiled the bathroom himself on weekends, kneeling on the floor with his sleeves rolled to the elbow, his back straight despite the hours. I painted the shutters dark green because I had always wanted dark green shutters. And Min said nothing except that they looked good. And I believed him because he was not a man who offered compliments idly. We bought furniture in pieces, 1 chair at a time, 1 lamp, 1 table, spreading the expense over months the way careful people do when they are building something meant to last. Daniel was 8 years old when we moved in. He ran from room to room the first evening, calling out the square footage of each space the way the real estate listings had described them, a number he had apparently memorized and found important. He was always like that, even then. Precise. Interested in measurements. Interested in what things were worth. I remember thinking it was an admirable quality in a child. I set up the altar in the front room the second week. Not immediately. I wanted to understand the light in that room first, where it fell in the morning, how it shifted by afternoon, what it looked like in the hour before dusk when everything in the house turned amber and slow. Min's mother had taught me that an altar should be placed where the light is honest, not too bright, not in shadow. Honest light, she said, means the ancestors can see clearly. I chose the low table against the north wall, beneath the window that faced the street. I arranged the photograph, the one from our 20th anniversary, the year we went to Dalat, and Min laughed more than I had ever heard him laugh, in the center, and I placed the brass incense holder my mother-in-law had given us as a wedding gift just in front of it. 2 candle holders on either side. A small ceramic cup for water, changed every morning. I have changed that water every morning for 22 years since he died. It takes less than a minute, but it is the minute I think about him most clearly. Min taught at the university for 30 years, engineering, the kind of work that required patience and precision, and the ability to explain complex things in simple language. He said once that teaching was the same whether you taught children or graduate students. The goal was always to build something in another person's mind that would remain there after you had gone. I told him I believed the same thing. We were well matched, the two of us. 2 people who had chosen the same work for the same reasons, who sat at the same kitchen table correcting papers on Sunday evenings, with the fan going and the street sounds coming through the open windows and nothing else needed. I taught English for 35 years at Nguyen Thi Minh Khai Secondary School. I taught grammar and composition and reading comprehension. But what I was really teaching, I understood over time, was how to pay attention, how to read carefully, how to understand not just what words say but what they mean, how to notice the difference between those two things, which is sometimes very large. My students gave me things at the end of each year. Small things. Usually. A card. A drawing. Once, a student named Phuong who had failed her first examination and then quietly, over the following semester, become the best writer in the class, gave me a small notebook with her name written on the inside cover and a note that said, "You taught me that words are tools, not decoration." I still have that notebook in the drawer beside my bed. Min died in the spring 6 years ago, on a Thursday morning when the air smelled of rain that had not yet arrived. He had been sick for 14 months, long enough that we had learned how to speak about it honestly, and long enough that we had also learned how to not speak about it at all, which is sometimes the same form of honesty. He died with the window open, as I have said, and with his hand in mine, and the last thing he said was something ordinary. He asked if I had remembered to turn off the stove and I told him yes, and he nodded, and that was that. Daniel came to the funeral with Vivian. They had been married 2 years by then. He stood at the grave with his hands at his sides, not crying, which I did not judge. People grieve in different rooms. But I noticed that he did not come back to the house afterward with the neighbors and the cousins and the old colleagues from the university. He said there was something he needed to handle. He did not say what. I did not ask. The house was full of people that afternoon. Min's sister brought food, too much food, the way people do when they do not know what else to offer. Carolyn Trin came and stayed until nearly 10 o'clock, washing cups in the kitchen and not saying anything in particular, just being present, which was exactly what was needed. Arthur Ngo sat in the same chair he always sat in and drank tea and told a story about Min from 40 years earlier, something involving a bicycle and a monsoon, and everyone laughed, and I was grateful for the laughter. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time. The altar was lit. The incense had burned down to a pale gray thread of smoke, barely visible. I thought about what Min used to say about the house. Good bones. Everything else can be fixed. I thought about Daniel standing at the grave with his hands at his sides. I thought about the way he had looked at the house when he arrived, not at me, not at the mourners, but at the house itself. The walls, the shutters, the garden gate, the way a man looks at something he is calculating. I told myself I was imagining it. Grief makes you see things that are not there, or perhaps it makes you see things that have always been there, and you are simply not sure which is happening. I went to bed. I changed nothing about that thought, but I did not forget it either. The house sold in March. I did not know this until April. Daniel told me on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of afternoon when the light comes through the kitchen window at a low angle and makes everything look softer than it is. He sat across from me at the table with his hands around a cup of tea he was not drinking, and he said it the way people say things they have already decided cannot be argued with. "We sold the District 2 house," he said. "We found a better opportunity, a newer development, closer to Vivian's office. It made more financial sense." I looked at him. "When?" I asked. "The paperwork closed in mid-March." I set my own cup down. "And the money?" "Reinvested. Into the new property." He finally lifted his tea, took a small sip. "It's a smarter investment, Ma. District 2 was appreciating too slowly. This new place, the value is already moving." I did not say anything for a moment. The fan turned overhead. Somewhere outside, a motorbike slowed at the corner. "The promissory note," I said. "The 95,000. Does the repayment schedule change?" Something moved across his face. Quick. The way a cloud shadow moves across a field there, and then gone before you are entirely sure you saw it. "Of course not," he said. "Nothing changes. We're just moving the asset." I nodded. I picked up my cup again. I drank my tea. I said nothing else about it that afternoon. But that evening, after Daniel had gone and the house was quiet, I sat in front of Min's altar for a long time. The incense burned slowly. the photograph watched. I thought about the word reinvested. I thought about the word asset. I thought about the fact that my son had bought a house with my money in November, sold it in March, bought another property, and had not mentioned any of this to me until the transaction was 4 weeks complete. I thought about what Vivian did for work. She was a loan officer at a private bank. She understood how money moved. She understood the gap between what things were called and what they actually were. She understood that the distance between a promissory note and an unenforceable piece of paper depended almost entirely on whether the person holding it knew the difference. I did not sleep well that night. 3 weeks later, Carolyn Trin called me in the morning while I was watering the small pot of jasmine I keep on the kitchen windowsill. She sounded careful. Carolyn is never careful. In 30 years of friendship, I have watched her say exactly what she means at exactly the volume she intends, without hesitation. Carefulness in her voice is its own kind of message. I need to ask you something, she said. Ask. Has Daniel spoken to you recently about your bank accounts? I set down the watering can. Why? A pause. I had lunch with Thu Huang last week. You remember her? She worked at Central Pacific Bank before she retired. She mentioned she'd seen Vivian at the bank, not her own branch, ours. Our branch was not Vivian's bank. Her institution was on the other side of the city. What was she doing? I asked. Thu Huang didn't know specifically, but she said Vivian was at the customer service desk for a long time, and she had a folder with her. A thick one. I looked at the jasmine on the windowsill. The flowers were small and white and indifferent. Thank you, I said. Miriam. I will look into it. That afternoon I went to the bank myself. I sat across from a young woman named Miss Lin, whose name tag was slightly crooked and who typed with great speed and efficiency, and I asked her to print me a full account statement for the past 6 months. She asked if I meant my checking account. I told her all of them. Every account held under my name, individual or joint. Miss Lin printed the statements. She handed them across the desk in a neat stack. I read them at the table in the corner of the bank, under a fluorescent light that hummed faintly, with my reading glasses on and my handbag in my lap. The checking account was normal. The small savings account I kept for household expenses was normal. The fixed deposit my husband had opened in both our names, which I had converted to my name alone after he died, was normal. The line of credit was not normal. I did not know I had a line of credit. It had been opened 7 months ago, in October, the same month Daniel had asked me for the loan. The same month I had written the promissory note and given him my retirement savings and called Arthur NGO to come and witness the signatures on a Tuesday morning. The line of credit was in my name. The credit limit was $50,000. The current outstanding balance was $34,260. There had been 11 withdrawals, ranging from $2,000 to $6,000 each. All of them made on weekdays, between 9 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon business hours. All of them made when I was at home watering jasmine or burning incense or reading in the back room. The most recent withdrawal had been made 9 days ago. I sat with the statement in my hands for a long time. The fluorescent light hummed. Miss Lin helped another customer at the desk. A man near the door shook out an umbrella. I thought about the folder Vivian had been carrying, the thick one. I thought about the fact that she was a loan officer, that she understood the paperwork, that she would know exactly which forms to bring, which signatures to replicate, how to make an application look like a formality when it was not. I thought about the way Daniel had said reinvested on that quiet Sunday afternoon, with his hands around his cup, not looking at me. I thought about the way he had said we have nothing to pay back. You should be grateful, the way he would say it 4 months from now in a room full of witnesses, and I understood, sitting in that bank with the statement in my hands, that this had not been impulsive. This had been constructed. Piece by piece, account by account, month by month. They had been building something. I folded the statement along its original crease. I put it in my handbag, beside my reading glasses and the small notebook I always carry. I thanked Miss Lin. I walked out into the afternoon. The street was loud and bright. Motorbikes and the smell of rain on concrete and a vendor calling out from the corner. I walked home. I did not call Daniel. I did not call Vivian. I did not call anyone. I had not yet decided what I was going to do, but I knew, with the particular certainty of a woman who had spent 35 years teaching people to read carefully, that whatever I did next needed to be done slowly and precisely and without a single wasted word. What I did not yet know was how much further they intended to go. I found it on a Wednesday, which is an ordinary day to find out your life has been altered without your permission. Daniel had come by the previous evening to drop off some papers. He said I needed to sign documents related to the house utilities. He told me a change in the billing address that required my signature as the property owner. He was in a hurry. He always seemed to be in a hurry these days, moving through rooms the way people move when they do not want to be asked questions. He had left his jacket on the back of the kitchen chair, the gray one with the small collar, the one Vivian had bought him 2 birthdays ago. He said he would pick it up next time. I folded it over the chair and thought nothing more of it until Wednesday morning when I went to move it to the hook near the door. Something shifted inside the breast pocket. I am not a woman who goes through other people's belongings. I want to say that clearly. In 35 years of teaching, I confiscated perhaps a dozen items from students who were using them as distractions: a game, a folded note, once a small radio that a boy named Than had tucked inside his uniform shirt, and I always returned them at the end of the day. I believed then, as I believe now, that a person's private things are their private things. But the jacket was in my house, and Daniel had told me to keep it until next time. I reached into the pocket. There were 2 things inside: a receipt from a restaurant I did not recognize, which I set on the table without reading, and a folded piece of paper, thicker than ordinary paper, the kind used for official documents. I unfolded it slowly. It was a property transfer certificate. The address was in District 2. The property Daniel and Vivian had purchased with my $95,000, the house with good school proximity, the smart investment in the appreciating neighborhood. The certificate showed the original purchase date in November. It showed the sale date in March. And it showed the final transfer amount, $273,000. I sat down. I had known they sold the house. Daniel had told me that in April, at this same kitchen table, with the afternoon light coming through the window at its low, soft angle, he had said the money was reinvested. He had said it was a smarter opportunity. I had nodded and asked about the promissory note, and he had said nothing changes. What he had not said was how much the house sold for. I did the arithmetic that a woman who has managed her own finances for 32 years does automatically. They had purchased the property for a total of $160,000, my $95,000 as the down payment, the remainder financed by the bank. They had sold it 5 months later for $273,000. After repaying the bank loan, the profit was somewhere above $100,000. $100,000, sitting somewhere in an account I had no knowledge of. Generated in part by the money I had handed across this same table on a Tuesday in October, in good faith, with a promissory note signed in Arthur & Go's careful presence. The incense on the altar had burned down to ash. The morning was very quiet. I refolded the certificate along its creases, and held it in both hands, and looked at it for a long time. I thought about reinvested. I thought about the line of credit, the $34,000 moved in 11 careful transactions during business hours, while I watered jasmine. I thought about the new development closer to Vivian's office, the smarter opportunity, the asset moving well. I thought about the fact that in 6 months, Daniel had not once mentioned a number. Not the sale price, not the profit, not the new property's purchase price, not what any of this meant for the repayment schedule written in my own handwriting on a piece of paper currently sitting in Carolyn Trin's filing cabinet behind a folder labeled Taxes 2019. He had given me directions without a map. He had answered questions I had not known to ask. I went to my desk in the back room, the small one beneath the window where I used to sit correcting papers on Sunday evenings while Min did the same at the kitchen table. I opened the bottom drawer and took out the folder where I kept financial records, bank statements, utility bills. The original receipt from when I had wired the $95,000 into Daniel's account, everything dated, everything in order. I had kept records my entire adult life. My mother had taught me that. She said money is only as reliable as the paper that describes it. I added the property transfer certificate to the folder. Then I sat for a moment and thought about what I still did not know. I did not know the address of the new property. Daniel had mentioned District 7, a new development, closer to Vivian's office. He had not given me a street name. He had not shown me photographs. He had not invited me to see it, the way a son might reasonably invite his mother to see the home he had bought. The home she had helped him afford. I did not know how much they had paid for it. I did not know whether it existed at all. That last thought arrived quietly, without drama, the way the most unsettling thoughts always arrive, not as a shout but as a question asked in a normal voice in the middle of an ordinary morning. I put on my good walking shoes, the beige ones with the low heel that Carolyn always said made me look like a retired principal, which I accepted as a compliment. I put my handbag over my arm. I went to the land registry office on Lai Tu Trong Street, where a public records clerk named Mr. Fat, who had the patient manner of a man who answered the same questions 200 times a week, helped me search property records under Daniel's name and Vivian's name and their combination. The District 2 house appeared. Sale recorded in March. Exactly as the certificate showed. I asked Mr. Fat to search for any new purchase registered to either name in the months following. He typed. He waited. He checked 2 separate databases. He looked up at me with the expression of a man who was about to deliver information he understood to be significant without fully knowing why. "Ma'am," he said, "there is no new property registered under either name in District 7 or anywhere else in the city in the past 8 months. I thanked him. I signed the visitor log. I walked out into the afternoon. I stood on the pavement outside the land registry office for a moment with my handbag over my arm and the noise of the street around me, and one thought turning slowly in the center of my mind, like a page being read for the second time. If there was no new property, then there was no reinvestment, which meant I needed to find out exactly where $100,000 had gone, and when I got home and opened my handbag to put away my transit card, I found something I did not remember placing there. A folded business card, pale blue, with a name I did not recognize and a title that read Senior Accounts Manager, and on the back, in Vivian's precise handwriting, a single line that made the hair on my arm stand up. "Don't let her sign anything else." I did not sleep that night. I lay in the back bedroom with the window open the way I always keep it, and I listened to the street sounds, a motorbike, a dog, rain beginning on the roof tiles, and I looked at the ceiling, and I thought about 6 words written in Vivian's handwriting on the back of a business card. Don't let her sign anything else. She had written it to someone. The card belonged to someone with the title Senior Accounts Manager, which meant someone at a financial institution, someone with access to accounts and instruments and the administrative machinery that moves money from one place to another without the knowledge of the person whose name is on the paperwork. I had found the card in my own handbag, which meant Vivian had put it there, which meant she had been inside my handbag at some point when I was not paying attention, and she had either placed it there deliberately as a warning, or a mistake, or something I was not yet able to interpret, or it had fallen from her own bag during one of her visits and found its way into mine by accident. I did not believe in accidents of that particular kind. In the morning I called Carolyn. I read her the name on the front of the card. Kevin Tran, Senior Accounts Manager, First Southern Private Bank. A pause. "That's not a retail bank," Carolyn said. "First Southern Private does wealth management. High net worth clients. What is the minimum?" Another pause while she looked it up. "Assets under management, minimum 500,000. I looked at the jasmine on the windowsill. "Miriam," Carolyn said. "Where did you get this card?" "My handbag," I said. "I'll explain later." "Can you find out anything about this Kevin Tran?" "I can ask Thu Huang. She knows everyone in banking in this city." "Please." Carolyn called back at 11:15. I was sitting at my desk with the financial folder open in front of me, reading the bank statements again, looking for anything I had missed the first time. "Kevin Tran," Carolyn said, 42 years old. "Has been at First Southern Private for 9 years. Before that, he worked at Central Pacific, the same bank where Vivian worked before she moved to her current position. They know each other. Thu Huang says they worked on the same floor for 3 years. I wrote this down. I wrote down the date and the time as well, the way I had always told my students to do when they were taking notes on something important. Context matters, sequence matters. The order in which things happened is itself a form of evidence. There's something else, Carolyn said, and I heard it again, that carefulness in her voice, that deliberate slowing of pace. Thu Huang looked him up in the professional registry. Kevin Tran has a client account that was opened 8 months ago. She can't see the name on the account. It's private, but she can see the account type. What type? A discretionary management account. Which means the account holder has authorized a third party to make financial decisions on their behalf, to move money, to invest, to withdraw without needing the account holder's approval for each transaction. I set down my pen. The account was opened, Carolyn said, with an initial deposit of $104,000. $104,000. The profit from the District 2 house sale, give or take, after the bank loan was repaid. Carolyn, I said, who is authorized as the third party on a discretionary management account? That's what I asked Thu Huang. A pause. It has to be someone the account holder designates, a family member, a trusted advisor, someone with documented authorization. I looked at Min's photograph on the altar. The good honest light fell across his face the way it always did at this hour of the morning. Can Thu Huang find out whose name is on the account? I asked. Not without a legal reason to access the records. Then I need a legal reason. I called attorney David Park that afternoon. I had met him twice before, once when Min died and I needed the estate paperwork handled, and once when a neighbor dispute about the garden wall required a letter written on official stationery. He was thorough and unhurried, and he did not speak more than was necessary, which I had always respected. I told him what I had found. The property certificate in Daniel's jacket pocket. The line of credit in my name, opened without my knowledge. The $34,000 withdrawn in 11 transactions. The business card in my handbag. Kevin Tran, First Southern Private Bank, a discretionary management account opened with slightly more than $100,000. David Park listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Lee, he said, if someone opened a line of credit in your name without your authorization, that is fraud. If someone is managing an account funded by your money without your knowledge, that is also potentially fraud, depending on what the documentation says. The documentation, I said. That is what I need to know about. I can file a request for disclosure on the line of credit. The bank is required to provide the original application and all authorization documents. He paused. That will tell us whose signature opened the account. How long? 3 to 5 business days. File it today, please. The documents arrived on the 4th day. David Park called me at 8:45 in the morning, before I had finished my tea. He read me the relevant section in a level voice. The line of credit application had been submitted online. The identification used was my national ID number and my date of birth. The address was correct. The phone number provided for verification was not my phone number. It was a number I did not recognize. The signature on the application was mine, except that I had never signed it. I sat with the phone held against my ear, and I thought about Vivian, who was a loan officer, who understood every field on every financial application, who knew which numbers were verified automatically and which required human review, who had worked for 3 years on the same floor as Kevin Tran at Central Pacific Bank before moving to her current position. I thought about the thick folder Thu Huang had seen her carrying at the bank. Mrs. Lê, David said, there is one more thing in the documents. Tell me. The application lists an emergency contact and secondary authorized user. A pause. The name given is Daniel Lee, my son. His name on an account I had not opened, funded by money I had given him in good faith, authorized by a signature that was not mine. I set down my teacup very carefully so that it did not make a sound against the saucer. David, I said, I need you to do one more thing. Of course, find out whether my name appears on any other accounts, any other instruments, any other documents filed in the past 12 months that I did not authorize. The silence on his end lasted 3 full seconds. Mrs. Lee, he said slowly, how many do you think there might be? And I realized then, sitting in my kitchen with the incense burning and the morning light coming through the shutters, that I did not know, and that not knowing was the most frightening thing that had happened to me in 6 years of living alone in this house. Because if they had done this once, with this much care, with a forged signature and a redirected phone number, and a colleague from a previous job waiting at a private bank to manage the proceeds. They had not done it only once. I have always been methodical. This is not a personality trait I chose deliberately. It developed the way most useful traits develop through years of necessity. When you stand in front of 32 students and you have 40 minutes and 17 concepts to convey and 4 children who will not sit still and one who understands everything before you finish the sentence, you learn to organize. You learn to sequence. You learn that the order in which you present information determines whether it is understood or simply heard. I applied the same principle now. I bought a new notebook. Not the kind I kept beside my bed. Not the kind I used for grocery lists. A proper one, with a hard cover, the kind I used to require my students to use for final examination preparation. Dark blue. I bought it from the stationery shop on Dong Khoi Street on a Tuesday morning when I was also buying incense and a small bag of rice, so that anyone who saw me would see an old woman running ordinary errands. I paid cash. I began organizing what I knew. Page 1. The promissory note. Amount, date, witnesses. Carolyn's filing cabinet. Sealed. Page 2. The property transfer certificate. Found in Daniel's jacket. District 2 house, purchased November, sold March. Sale price $273,000. Profit, after bank loan, approximately $104,000. Page 3. The line of credit. Opened in my name without my knowledge. $34,260 withdrawn in 11 transactions over 8 months. Forged signature on the application. Daniel listed as secondary authorized user. Page 4. Kevin Tran. First Southern Private Bank. Discretionary management account. Opening deposit, approximately $104,000. Vivian's former colleague. The business card in my handbag, which I now kept in the blue notebook, taped to the inside back cover. Page 5. What I did not yet know. The current balance of the account at First Southern Private. Whether there were other instruments, other accounts, other forged documents, I had not yet found. What, precisely, Vivian intended when she wrote, "Don't let her sign anything else." Whether there was more coming. I looked at page 5 for a long time. Then I called Arthur and Go. Arthur had been our neighbor for 40 years. He had witnessed my wedding, attended Min's funeral, and sat in my kitchen more times than I could count, drinking tea and saying very little but always the right thing. In 40 years as a notary public, he had handled the paperwork of hundreds of families, births, deaths, property transfers, business agreements, divorces. He understood the legal weight of documents the way a carpenter understands the weight of wood. He knew what held and what didn't. I did not tell him everything. I told him I had some questions about property law and financial instruments, and I would very much appreciate his company over tea on Thursday morning if he was available. He came at 9 o'clock in his white shirt, the small collar one, the same one he had worn when he witnessed Daniel and Vivian's signatures 11 months ago. He sat down, accepted his tea, and waited. Arthur had always known how to wait. I showed him the property transfer certificate. I showed him the bank statements with the line of credit. I did not show him the notebook. I told him what David Park had found regarding the forged signature and the redirected phone number. Arthur read everything twice, slowly. His reading glasses low on his nose. Then he set it all down and picked up his tea. "Miriam," he said, "you need a forensic accountant." "I know. And you need someone at the land registry who can do a full search under your name, not just theirs. Sometimes people open instruments using a relative's name as the primary holder, without the relative knowing. It's not common, but it happens. I had not thought of that. I wrote it in my notebook after he left. "Is there someone you trust?" he asked. I thought of Thu Huang, who had noticed Vivian at the bank, and called Carolyn immediately. I thought of David Park, who had filed the disclosure request without asking me unnecessary questions. I thought of Carolyn, who had kept the envelope in her filing cabinet for 11 months without once asking what was inside. "Yes," I said. "Several people." Arthur nodded. He finished his tea. At the door, he turned back with the expression he used when he was about to say something he considered important. "They think you don't know how these things work," he said. "That's their main error." After he left, I went to Min's altar. I changed the water in the ceramic cup. I lit a fresh stick of incense and watched the first thread of smoke rise, thin and straight in the still air of the room. My father used to say, "Still water runs deepest." I had thought of this in the conference room, in front of Daniel and his lawyers, with the promissory note still folded in my purse. I thought of it again now, in front of my husband's photograph, in the house where we had built 32 years of ordinary life. Still, water does not look like much from the surface. It looks passive. It looks like it has accepted whatever has been done to it. That is the misunderstanding people make. They see the stillness and they think it means surrender. What they do not see is the depth. I had spent 8 months being still, while they opened accounts in my name, while they moved money in 11 careful transactions, while they sold a house and redirected the profit and wrote notes to colleagues about what I should and should not be permitted to sign. I had been still because I had not known. And now that I knew, I would continue to look still because the most useful thing I could do was let them keep believing I was exactly what they thought I was. An old woman. Retired. Soft. Trusting. Grateful, even. I spent the following week doing 3 things. I met with David Park and authorized him to file a full record search under my name at the land registry, the tax office, and the credit bureau. All 3, whatever my name was attached to, I wanted to see it. I met with a forensic accountant named Miss Bui Thilan, who David Park recommended, and who had the precise, unhurried manner of someone accustomed to finding things that other people had tried to hide. I gave her the bank statements, the line of credit documents, and the property transfer certificate. She asked very few questions and took very careful notes. And I had dinner with Daniel and Vivian on a Friday evening, at their apartment. At a table, Vivian had set nicely with cloth napkins and the good dishes. I ate the food she had cooked. I admired the apartment. I asked about their work. I smiled at the right moments. When Daniel poured me tea, I thanked him warmly. I noticed that Vivian watched me throughout dinner with an expression I recognized from 35 years in the classroom. The expression of a student waiting to find out if the teacher had graded the examination yet. I gave her nothing. On Monday morning, Miss Bui called me. "Mrs. Lee," she said, "the land registry search came back. What did you find? Your name appears on 3 property instruments you may not be aware of." A pause. One of them is a power of attorney document. Filed 6 months ago. It authorizes a named individual to make property and financial decisions on your behalf, without requiring your signature for each transaction. Another pause. "Mrs. Lê, do you know who Vivian Lê's mother is?" I set down my pen. "I know her name," I said. "We have met twice." "Why?" "Because the power of attorney document authorizes her. Not Daniel. Not Vivian. A woman I had met twice, whose name I barely remembered, who had no relationship to me except through a marriage I had attended, and a son I had raised, and a promissory note I had written in my own handwriting at a kitchen table 11 months ago. A woman I would not have thought to look for. A woman I had never once considered. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by hand, not by post, by a young man in a collared shirt who knocked at my door at 8:45 while I was still drinking my first cup of tea, and who handed me an envelope with the practiced neutrality of someone who delivers difficult things for a living and has learned not to think too much about it. He did not wait for a response. He was back on his motorbike and gone before I had fully closed the door. The envelope was thick. High-quality paper. The cream-colored kind that costs money. My name on the front in printed letters. No return address. I set it on the kitchen table and finished my tea first. Then I opened it. Inside were 4 documents, each one clipped separately, each one printed on letterhead from a law firm I did not recognize, Fan, Nguyen and Associates, an address in District 1. The first document was a letter addressed to me, signed by an attorney named Phan Duc Minh, informing me that his clients, Daniel Lê and Vivian Lê, wished to formalize certain matters related to the property at Phan Dinh Phung Street and the financial arrangements between the parties. The language was courteous. It was the courtesy of someone who does not expect resistance. The second document was a property deed transfer form, my house, my name at the top, a signature line at the bottom. The third document was a declaration stating that the $95,000 transferred in October of the previous year had been given as a gift, freely and without condition, to be used at the sole discretion of the recipients. It had a line for my signature and a line for a witness. The fourth document was a revision to the power of attorney already filed in my name, the one authorizing Vivian's mother, expanding its scope to include all financial accounts, all property decisions, and all legal instruments bearing my name, effective immediately upon my signature. I read all 4 documents twice. Then I stacked them neatly, clipped them back together, and placed them in the blue notebook. Daniel called at 10:15. "Ma." His voice was pleasant, the tone he used when he was certain of the outcome of a conversation. "Did you receive the documents?" "I did." "Good." The attorney put everything together very cleanly. "It's mostly just formalities, making sure the paperwork reflects reality. You know how it is." A pause. "If you can sign and return them by the end of the week, that would be ideal. David can notarize, or we can arrange someone to come to you if it's easier." I looked at the altar. The morning light was doing what it always did at this hour, falling honestly across Min's photograph. "I'll look them over," I said. Of course. Take your time." He said this the way people say take your time when they mean the opposite. "I just wanted to make sure you understood that it's all straightforward." The attorney explained, "Everything is standard." "Standard," I repeated. "Yes. For situations like this." I did not ask what situations like this meant. I said I would be in touch, and I ended the call, and I sat at the table for a moment with my hand resting flat on the surface. 3 days later, Vivian came to the house alone. This was unusual. Vivian did not visit alone. She and Daniel moved in tandem, which I had always understood to be a preference rather than a necessity. Seeing her at my door without him, holding a cake from the good bakery on Laloy Street, smiling the way she smiled when she wanted something, told me that this visit had been decided between them, assigned to her specifically. I let her in. I made tea. I did not mention the documents. She sat at my kitchen table and talked for 20 minutes about things that did not matter: a restaurant she had tried, a film she had seen, a colleague whose wedding she was planning to attend. She ate a slice of the cake and said I should eat too, that I looked thin, that she worried about me living alone in this big house. I ate the cake. I agreed it was very good. Then she said, as if the thought had only just occurred to her, "Have you had a chance to look at those papers the attorney sent?" "I've looked at them," I said. "And?" She kept her expression pleasant, but her hands, I noticed, had stopped moving. They were resting on the table very still, the hands of a woman waiting for a verdict. "They're detailed," I said. "It's just paperwork." She laughed a small laugh. "Daniel and I thought it would be cleaner to have everything official, so there's no confusion later." She tilted her head. "You want things to be clear between us, don't you, Ma?" She called me Ma. She had done this since the wedding, and I had never asked her to and never told her not to. It was a word she used the way people use tools to build something, to move something, to make something stay in place. "Of course," I said. She left an hour later with the satisfied expression of someone who has completed a task. I stood at the window and watched her motorbike until it turned at the corner. Then I called David Park. I told him about the documents. I described each one. He was quiet for a moment, in the way that meant he was thinking carefully. "Mrs. Lee," he said, "if you sign those documents, the promissory note becomes very difficult to enforce. They'll argue the gift declaration supersedes it. Combined with the expanded power of attorney, they would effectively control all of your financial and property decisions." "I know," I said. "Don't sign anything." "I won't." But the following morning brought something I had not anticipated. I arrived at my bank at 9 o'clock to check on the status of the credit bureau report David had requested. The teller, not Miss Lynn this time, a young man named Mr. Hugh, pulled up my account and then looked at his screen for a moment with an expression I recognized, the expression of someone who has found something and is deciding how to say it. "Mrs. Lee," he said carefully, "there appears to be a hold on your primary checking account." I looked at him. "What kind of hold?" "A legal hold. Filed yesterday afternoon." He turned the screen slightly so I could see. "It was requested by Fan, Nguyen and Associates on behalf of—" He hesitated. "On behalf of your son." The bank was quiet around me. Air conditioning, the soft click of keyboards, a telephone ringing somewhere in the back. Daniel had frozen my account. Before I had signed a single document, before I had responded to the attorney's letter, Before I had done anything at all, he had filed a legal hold on the account I used to pay for incense and rice and electricity and the small daily expenses of a life lived alone in a house on Phan Dinh Phung Street. He had moved first. He had not waited for my response, because he had decided my response did not matter. I stood at the bank counter, and I thought about the letter, the cake, Vivian's hands very still on the table, and I understood then exactly what they believed, that I was already finished. That the documents were a formality. That the hold was simply a precaution taken by people who were certain they had already won. I thanked Mr. Hugh. I signed the inquiry form. I walked out into the morning. My hands were steady. My face was composed. Inside, something that had been patient for a very long time was done being patient. I took out my phone and sent one message to David Park, 4 words only. It is time now. Miss Bowie called on a Tuesday morning while I was changing the water on Min's altar. I had just lifted the small ceramic cup. Just poured the old water into the basin I kept beside the table for this purpose. Just filled the cup fresh from the pitcher I set out each night. My hands were steady. The incense from the morning burning had almost gone out, just a thin gray thread left in the still air. Min's photograph watched from its place in the center of the altar, the way it always watched, patient, honest, the face of a man who had understood most things and asked for very little. I set the cup back down and answered the phone. Mrs. Lê, Miss Bowie said, I need you to come to my office today, this afternoon, if you are able. I looked at Min's photograph. What did you find? I asked. A pause. Not the pause of someone who has found nothing. The pause of someone who has found more than she expected and is deciding how to deliver it. Please come in person, she said. There are documents you should see directly. I arrived at 2 o'clock. Miss Bowie's office was on the 4th floor of a building on Win Hue Boulevard, small and organized in the precise way of someone who works with numbers all day and has learned that disorder costs time. She had 3 folders on the desk when I sat down. She offered me tea. I accepted. She poured it and then sat across from me with her hands folded and looked at me with an expression I recognized from my years in the classroom, the expression of a teacher who is about to explain something that will be difficult to hear, and who respects the student enough to say it clearly. I'll begin with the financial summary, she said. The line of credit I already knew about, $34,260 withdrawn over 8 months. What I did not know was that there were 2 additional instruments filed under my name at a secondary credit union, not the bank I used, a smaller institution across the city where I had no account and no history. Both had been opened in the same month as the first line of credit. Combined outstanding balance, an additional $21,000. Total debt opened in my name without my knowledge, $55,260. I wrote the number in my notebook. The power of attorney filed 6 months ago, Miss Bowie continued, has been used 3 times. The first time to authorize the discretionary management account at First Southern Private. The second time to access your fixed deposit account, Min's account, the one you converted after he died, and redirect the quarterly interest payments to a separate account held in Vivian's mother's name. She paused. The third use was last month, to submit a property valuation request on the house. I set down my pen. They had the house valued? I said. Yes. And Mrs. Lê, the valuation was submitted to a property developer, a formal inquiry of interest. Not a sale, not yet, but a first step. The house on Phan Dinh Phung Street, 32 years. The dark green shutters Min had called a good choice. The window I kept open on rainy nights. The altar in the front room where the light fell honestly at a particular angle of the morning. I looked at the wall above Miss Bowie's desk. A calendar, a framed certificate, a small clock. There is one more thing, she said, and her voice changed slightly, dropped half a register, the way voices drop when a person is delivering something they wish they did not have to deliver. She opened the 3rd folder. Inside were printed email records. David Park had obtained them through the disclosure process, attached to the legal hold filed on my checking account. Correspondence between Daniel's attorney, Phan Duc Min, and Daniel himself, over the past 4 months. Miss Bowie did not hand them to me immediately. She looked at me first. Mrs. Lê, she said, are you all right to read these now? Yes, I said. She placed the folder in front of me. I read slowly, the way I had always read things that mattered. The first several emails were logistical dates, document names, filing procedures. the language of people organizing a process they had discussed in person and were now executing through official channels. I understood each step because I had already found each step. The credit lines, the power of attorney, the discretionary account, the legal hold. Then I reached an email dated 7 months ago, early in the process, before any documents had been filed. It was from Daniel to his attorney, a long email, longer than the others. I will not reproduce every word, but I will say what was in it, because it is part of what happened, and I have spent my life believing that what happened should be recorded accurately, without softening, without revision. He wrote that I was old and would not understand the financial instruments being used. He wrote that I had always been trusting and that this was a manageable characteristic. He wrote that the promissory note he knew about the promissory note. He had always known was a risk that needed to be neutralized, and that the gift declaration, once signed, would accomplish this. He wrote that I would likely sign without reading carefully because, and here I stopped, and here I read the sentence twice. He wrote that I had always trusted him more than I trusted my own judgment, and that this was something he had relied on since he was a boy. Since he was a boy, I set the paper down. I looked at the window. Outside, the afternoon light moved across the rooftops of Nguyen Hue Boulevard, the way light moves across things that do not know they are being looked at. I thought about Daniel at 8 years old, running through the rooms of the house on Phan Dien Phung Street, calling out the square footage. I had thought it was admirable, precise, interested in measurements, interested in what things were worth. I thought about every Sunday evening I had spent at the kitchen table correcting papers while he sat with his homework nearby. Every morning I had burned incense and changed the water and kept Min's memory in the honest light of that room. Every sacrifice made quietly, without record, without account, the way parents make sacrifices not as investments, not as loans, not as leverage, but as love, given without condition, given because he was mine. He had known since he was a boy. He had catalogued it, stored it, used it. I sat in Miss Bowie's office for a long time without speaking. She did not rush me. She refilled my tea without asking. The small clock on her wall moved through its minutes. When I finally spoke, my voice was level. It was the same voice I had used for 35 years in front of a classroom. The voice that did not waver when children were difficult, when administrators were unreasonable, when the work was harder than it should have been. The voice that had nothing to prove because it had already decided. Miss Bowie, I said, I need a complete forensic summary. Every instrument, every transaction, every document filed in my name in the past 12 months. Dates, amounts, institutions, authorization signatures, every single one. I can have it ready by Friday. Thursday, I said. Please. She nodded. I gathered my notebook and my handbag. I stood. At the door, I paused, not because I was uncertain, but because there was one thing I needed to confirm before I left. The promissory note, I said. The one in Carolyn Trin's filing cabinet, signed by both of them, witnessed by Arthur No, still in the sealed envelope. That document, Miss Bowie said carefully, is your strongest instrument. Nothing they have filed changes its legal standing. It predates everything. I nodded. I walked out into the corridor and pressed the button for the elevator and stood waiting with my handbag over my arm and my notebook held against my chest. In 35 years of teaching, I had failed a student only when I had exhausted every other option. I had stayed late, I had written extra notes, I had explained things 6 different ways before I accepted that understanding was not going to come. I had always believed people could do better. I was done believing that now. The elevator arrived. I stepped inside. The doors closed. I was 68 years old, and I had just read my son's plan to take everything I had built in a lifetime, and I was not going to cry about it in an elevator on Nguyen Hue Boulevard. I was going to finish what he had started. I have always prepared for examinations the same way, not by studying harder in the final days, not by reviewing everything at once in a panic the night before, by working steadily over time, building knowledge in layers, so that when the examination arrived I was not cramming, I was simply confirming what I already knew. My students who failed were almost always students who had waited. My students who passed were the ones who had been quietly working all along, who sat down on examination day, with their materials organized and their minds clear. I thought about this on Thursday morning when Miss Bowie's complete forensic summary arrived by email to David Park's office, and David called me at 8:15 while I was eating breakfast to tell me he had printed everything and would I come in that afternoon. I told him I would come at 2 o'clock. Then I finished my breakfast. The summary was 41 pages. Miss Bowie had organized it chronologically, beginning with the promissory note in October, which she had listed at the top, under a heading she had titled Originating Document, Legally Binding, as a clear counterpoint to everything that followed, and ending with the legal hold filed on my checking account 11 months later. Every instrument, every transaction, every forged signature, every unauthorized withdrawal, 41 pages of what my son and his wife had built, piece by careful piece, while I burned incense and watered jasmine, and changed the water in the ceramic cup, and trusted that the people I had raised to adulthood were the people they had appeared to be. I read all 41 pages sitting in David Park's conference room. He sat across from me and did not speak while I read, which was exactly right. When I finished, I placed the summary on the table and folded my hands on top of it. "What is our position?" I asked. David turned his own copy of the summary to the first page. He had made notes in the margins in his careful attorney's handwriting, small and precise. "Your position is strong," he said. "The promissory note is intact, witnessed, sealed, predating all other documents. The forensic evidence shows a systematic pattern of fraud. It is not one mistake, not a misunderstanding, not a family disagreement about money. It is documented, sequential, planned financial crime. Miss Bowie can testify to this." He turned a page. "The forged signatures on the credit applications constitute identity fraud. The power of attorney was obtained without your knowledge or consent, also fraud. The legal hold on your account was filed under false pretenses, using fabricated claims about your mental competence." "They claimed mental incompetence?" "In the filing." He looked at me steadily. "They stated, as grounds for the hold, that you were showing signs of cognitive decline and were no longer capable of managing your own financial affairs." I sat with that for a moment. The same tactic, I understood, as the documents they had sent to me, the gift declaration, the expanded power of attorney, the property transfer form, not violence, not confrontation, paper. They used paper the way I used paper, except that theirs was false and mine was not. "What do we do about the hold?" I asked. "I've already filed a motion to lift it, with Miss Bowie's forensic summary attached as supporting documentation. I expect the court will grant it within the week." He paused. "But Mrs. Lee, there is a decision to make about how you want to proceed overall. We can pursue this through civil court recovery of the stolen funds, invalidation of all fraudulent instruments, damages, or we can refer the criminal elements to the relevant authorities and pursue both tracks simultaneously. The fraud and identity theft charges carry serious penalties." "Both tracks," I said. He nodded, as if this was what he had expected. "Then I'll need you to sign several documents authorizing me to act on your behalf. I'll also need the original promissory note. I'll call Carolyn today." I left David's office at 4 o'clock and walked to Carolyn's apartment 2 streets over, the way I had walked it hundreds of times over 30 years. The afternoon was warm. The street vendors were setting up for the evening hour. The smell of grilled corn and something sweet from the stall on the corner where a woman had sold the same things for as long as I could remember. Carolyn made tea. She retrieved the envelope from her filing cabinet herself, from behind the folder labeled Taxes 2019, and she brought it to the kitchen table and set it down between us without ceremony. "Do you want me to open it?" she asked. "I'll do it." The seal had not been broken. The envelope was exactly as I had left it 11 months ago, the flap sealed, my handwriting on the front, Carolyn's address clear and unchanged. I opened it carefully with the small penknife Carolyn keeps in her kitchen drawer for such things, and I removed the promissory note and I unfolded it and I read it. My handwriting. $95,000. The date. The terms. The repayment schedule. Daniel's signature. Vivian's signature. Arthur and Go's careful witness notation, his name written beneath theirs in the same unhurried hand he had used for 40 years of notary work. Everything exactly as it had been the morning we all sat at my kitchen table and signed in the honest light of the ordinary day. I refolded it and handed it to Carolyn to hold a moment longer while I finished my tea. Then I called Arthur. He answered on the second ring, which is always how he answers when he is at home in his chair in the afternoon. I told him what was happening. I told him about the forensic summary, the fraudulent instruments, the legal hold, the grounds they had cited for the hold, David Park's plan. Arthur was quiet for a long time. "Miriam," he said, "you will need me to testify." "Yes, I am available whenever you need." I thanked him. I ended the call. Over the following week, I did the things that needed to be done quietly, without drama, without announcement. I brought the promissory note to David Park in a clean envelope. I gave Miss Bowie's forensic summary to the officer at the Financial Crimes Division of the relevant authority, along with David's referral letter. I signed the documents authorizing David to act on my behalf in both civil and criminal proceedings. I responded to Daniel's attorney's letter for the first time, a single paragraph, written by David on my behalf, informing Duc Min that I had retained counsel and that all future communications should be directed accordingly. Nothing more. I did not call Daniel. I did not call Vivian. I did not give them any indication of what was coming. When Daniel called on a Thursday evening, pleasant voice, checking in, asking if I had given any more thought to the documents, I told him I was still reviewing things with my attorney, that these matters took time at my age, that I hoped he was patient. He laughed the comfortable laugh of a man who was not worried. "Of course, Ma," he said, "whenever you're ready." I said good night. I ended the call. I went to the altar and changed the water in the ceramic cup, and lit one stick of incense and stood for a moment in the quiet of the room. The smoke rose straight up in the still air. Min's photograph watched from the center of the table in the honest morning light that had by now softened into evening. I thought about the examination I had been preparing for. I thought about the students who had waited, and the students who had worked steadily all along. I thought about 41 pages of documented fraud and a sealed promissory note signed in Arthur & Go's steady presence, and a forensic accountant ready to testify, and an attorney with a motion already filed, and a filing with the Financial Crimes Division already submitted. Everything in order, every page numbered, every date confirmed, every signature verified. The examination was scheduled. The room was ready. All that remained was for them to sit down. The mediation session was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. David Park had requested it through the court, as a required step before civil proceedings could advance. Duc Min had agreed on behalf of Daniel and Vivian, which told me they were still confident. Confident people agree to mediation because they believe they will win it the same way they have won everything else, through preparation, through paperwork, through the assumption that the other side has less. I arrived at David's office at 9:15. I wore my good Audai, the deep blue one, the color of late evening, the one I had worn to Min's retirement dinner 20 years ago, and to every serious occasion since. I had pressed it the night before, carefully, the way my mother had taught me: collar first, then the panels, then the sleeves, never the other way. I pinned my hair back. I wore no jewelry, except the small jade pendant Min had given me on our 25th anniversary, green and smooth against the hollow of my throat. Carolyn had offered to come. Arthur had offered to come. I had told them both the same thing: not yet. Their time would come in a courtroom, under oath, in front of a judge. Today was something else. Today was for me. David met me at the door with the expression of a man who is prepared thoroughly and is now ready. He showed me the conference room, round table, 6 chairs, a water pitcher in the center, morning light through the window on the east side. Neutral, formal, designed to feel fair to everyone. I chose my seat facing the door. They arrived at 5 minutes past 10. Daniel came first, in a dark suit. His posture exactly as I remembered it: straight, certain. The posture of a man who moves through rooms expecting them to arrange themselves around him. Vivian followed in a gray blazer, her folder tucked under one arm, her expression composed. Duc Min came last, rolling a small briefcase, already scanning the room with the efficient eyes of an attorney calculating terrain. Daniel saw me and smiled. It was a careful smile, practiced. The smile of a man who is managing his mother at a formal proceeding and wants the room to see how patient he is. "Ma," he said, "you look well." I said nothing. I gestured to the chairs across the table. Duc Min set up quickly, folders opened, documents stacked, a yellow legal pad at an angle. He was organized, which I had expected. He spoke first, as attorneys do, outlining the purpose of the session, to reach an agreement regarding the property and financial matters in dispute before the case proceeded to civil litigation. He used the word agreement the way people use it when they mean capitulation. He used the word resolution the way people use it when they mean the other side stops arguing. He presented their position in 3 parts. First, the $95,000 had been given as a gift, as evidenced by the declaration they had prepared, which Fawn placed on the table with the signature line facing toward me. Second, the property decisions made by Daniel and Vivian had been prudent financial management, appropriate given their expertise and the complexity of the market. Third, given my age and the evidence of confusion about financial matters here, Fan used a word I noted precisely, confusion, not incompetence. They had adjusted the language. It would be in everyone's best interest for Daniel to be granted formal oversight of my financial affairs going forward. He finished. He folded his hands. Daniel looked at me across the table with the expression I recognized now as the one he had worn since he was a boy standing at the graveside of his father, the expression of a man waiting for the world to confirm what he had already decided. David began to speak. I touched his arm. He stopped. I reached into my handbag. I took out the blue notebook. I opened it to the inside back cover and removed the business card I had kept there for 4 months. The pale blue card with Kevin Tran's name and title on the front and Vivian's handwriting on the back. I placed it in the center of the table. Don't let her sign anything else. Vivian's eyes went to it immediately. A small movement, quickly controlled, but I had spent 35 years watching students read things they did not expect to see, and I knew what recognition looked like. I reached into my handbag again. I placed Miss Buey's forensic summary on the table, all 41 pages, bound with a black clip. I placed the credit bureau report beside it. I placed the land registry records showing 3 instruments filed under my name without my knowledge. I placed the printed email correspondence Van Duke Min's own records, the ones David had obtained through the disclosure process, the ones that included Daniel's email from 7 months ago. I placed that one on top. Daniel looked at the stack of documents. The careful smile had not left his face, but it had changed in quality. It was thinner now. Stretched, David spoke. He walked through the forensic summary in the level voice of an attorney presenting evidence that does not need to be dramatized. $55,000 in unauthorized credit instruments. $34,000 in withdrawals during business hours while I was at home. A forged signature on the credit application confirmed by handwriting analysis. A power of attorney obtained without my knowledge, used 3 times. Most recently to request a property valuation on my house for submission to a developer. He paused. We have also, David said, filed a referral with the Financial Crimes Division. That process is separate from these proceedings and is not contingent on their outcome. The room was very quiet. Van Duke Min had stopped writing on his yellow legal pad. His pen was still. Vivian was looking at the table. Daniel was looking at me. I looked back at him. I thought about the morning he had sat at my kitchen table and told me the money was reinvested. I thought about Vivian at the same table with her cake and her careful questions and her hands very still and her voice saying, "You want things to be clear between us, don't you, Ma?" I thought about the letter delivered by the young man in the collared shirt, the cream-colored envelope, the 4 documents inside the gift declaration, the property transfer form, the expanded power of attorney, the signature line at the bottom of each one, waiting. I thought about what Daniel had written in the email 7 months ago, the sentence I had read twice in Miss Buey's office while the small clock moved through its minutes. She has always trusted me more than she trusted her own judgment. This is something I have relied on since I was a boy. David set the promissory note on the table last. He placed it in front of Van Duke Min. Unfolded, flat. Every word legible. Every signature clear. My handwriting. $95,000. The date. The terms. Daniel's signature. Vivian's signature. Arthur Ngo's witness notation beneath them. His name in the careful hand of 40 years of notary work. This document, David said, predates every instrument your clients have filed. It establishes the transfer as a loan, not a gift. It was sealed immediately after signing and held by a third party, Mrs. Lee's colleague, Miss Trin, who is prepared to testify to the chain of custody. The witness, Mr. Arthur N. Go, is also prepared to testify. Phan Duc Minh picked up the promissory note. He read it. He set it down and looked at his client. Daniel was no longer smiling. He was looking at me the way I had looked at that email in Miss Bowie's office, as if he was reading something twice, hoping the second reading would say something different from the first. I spoke for the first time since the session began. Daniel, I said, you told me once that I should be grateful you let me live in my own house. I said it quietly, without heat, the way I had said important things in 35 years of classrooms. I want you to understand something. That house was built by your father and by me, year by year, the way everything worth keeping is built. It belongs to the woman who changed the water on his altar every morning for 6 years. It belongs to the woman who lent her son $95,000 and had the wisdom to write it down. I folded my hands on the table. I have been grateful my entire life, I said. But gratitude is not the same thing as surrender. No one in the room said anything. Outside the window, the morning continued as mornings do: traffic, light, the ordinary movement of a city going about its business. The water pitcher stood in the center of the table, untouched. Phan Duc Minh closed his folder. Phan Duc Minh requested a recess at 10:47. He used the word recess the way attorneys use it when they mean they need to speak to their clients privately and urgently, and cannot do so in front of the other side. David agreed. We moved to separate rooms, David and I to his office down the hall, Daniel and Vivian and their attorney to the small waiting room near the entrance. David poured water. I sat in the chair by the window and looked out at the street below. A woman was walking a small dog. A vendor was arranging fruit on a cart. The morning was doing what mornings do, indifferent to what was happening 4 floors above it. They're calculating, David said. Yes, I said. Min will tell them the promissory note changes everything, that the forensic summary changes everything, that the criminal referral changes the entire landscape of their position, and they will argue anyway, I said. For a while. He sat across from me. Mrs. Lê, in my experience, this is the moment when people in their position begin to make decisions based on fear rather than strategy. That is when errors occur. He was right. He had been a civil litigation attorney for 22 years. He had seen this room, or rooms like it, many times. We waited 31 minutes. When we returned to the conference table, something had changed. Not dramatically, the room looked the same. The documents were still stacked where David had left them. The water pitcher still stood in the center untouched. But the arrangement of the 3 people across the table had shifted in a way that told me something had happened during the recess. Vivian was sitting slightly apart from Daniel. A few inches only, barely noticeable. But I had spent 35 years reading the distance between people in a room. Distance is its own language. Phan Duc Minh spoke first. He had a revised position, he said. His clients were prepared to acknowledge that the original transfer had been structured as a loan. They were prepared to discuss a repayment schedule. However, regarding the other matters, the credit instruments, the power of attorney, those had been undertaken with my best interests in mind, and there was room for interpretation regarding authorization. Room for interpretation. I wrote the phrase in my notebook while he was still speaking. David responded calmly. There was no room for interpretation in a forged signature. There was no room for interpretation in a phone number redirect used to intercept bank verification calls. There was no room for interpretation in 11 withdrawals totaling $34,000 made through an instrument opened without consent. He said this without raising his voice. Vivian looked at the table. Daniel looked at Vivian. It was a brief look. A few seconds. But it was the look of a man who had expected someone to do something and was discovering she had not done it. Or could not do it. Or was choosing not to. I had seen that look before. Too, not in 35 years of teaching, but in the years of my marriage, in neighbors' houses, in family gatherings, in the way people look at each other when a shared plan is coming apart at the seam they had agreed to hold. Phan Duc Minh was speaking again. I was watching Vivian. She had been the architect. I had understood this for some time. Daniel had the motive, the greed, the entitlement, the long habit of measuring what things were worth, but Vivian had the knowledge. The loan officer's understanding of instruments and applications, and the gap between what signatures looked like and what computers verified. Kevin Tran at First Southern Private, the thick folder at the bank, the credit lines, the power of attorney, the redirected phone number, the discretionary account. She had built it. And now she was sitting 3 inches away from the man she had built it for, and she was not speaking. Van Duke Min paused in his presentation. "Mrs. Lee," he said, addressing me directly for the first time, "I think we can find a resolution here that serves everyone's interests. A repayment plan, a formal restructuring of the financial arrangements, and an agreement that the more serious allegations be handled internally, within the family, rather than the referral to the Financial Crimes Division," David said, "has already been filed. That process cannot be recalled by any agreement made in this room." Silence. Daniel turned to Van Duke Min. "You said we had time to—" "That was before I saw the full forensic summary," Van said, quietly but precisely, the way a professional delivers information to a client he is no longer certain deserved his services. "So, there's nothing," Daniel stopped. "The criminal referral is separate from the civil proceedings," Van said. "It always was." Another silence. Longer. Then Daniel did something I had not expected. He turned to Vivian. Not to confer, not to strategize. He turned to her the way a person turns toward the source of a problem, when the problem has become too large to manage. "You said the signatures were undetectable," he said. His voice was low, but the room was quiet enough. Vivian's hands on the table did not move. "Daniel, you said handwriting analysis wouldn't—" "Daniel, sharper now. A warning. You were the one who knew how to do it. I didn't even know what a discretionary management account was before you explained." "Stop talking." Her voice had changed entirely. The composed loan officer, the careful daughter-in-law, the woman with the cloth napkins and the good bakery cake, that woman was gone. What remained was someone I had not met before, precise, cold, trying to calculate, in real time, how much damage was being done by every word leaving his mouth. Too much. That was the answer. Far too much. Van Duke Min placed his hand briefly on the table in a gesture that meant stop and also meant I can no longer help you if you keep speaking, and also meant everything you are saying is being heard by the other side. Daniel heard none of it. "I told you from the beginning we should have just asked her," he said. "You were the one who said she'd never give us the money if she knew what it was really for. You were the one who said—" "Enough." Vivian stood. She picked up her folder. She looked at Van Duke Min. "I need separate representation." The room was very still. Van Duke Min looked at her, then at Daniel, then at the documents stacked on the table, the forensic summary, the credit records, the printed email with Daniel's words about his mother's trust, the promissory note in my handwriting with both their signatures at the bottom. "I'll need to recuse myself," he said quietly, given the conflict of interest. Daniel looked at his attorney, then at his wife, then at me. I had not spoken since we returned to the room. I looked at my son across the table. The dark suit, the certain posture, the face that had his father's jaw and none of his father's shame. I thought about the 8-year-old who ran through the rooms of the house calling out square footage. I thought about the email, the sentence I had read twice, the thing he had relied on since he was a boy. He had believed my trust was a weakness, a manageable characteristic, something to be catalogued and used. What he had not understood, what neither of them had understood, building their careful architecture of forged signatures and redirected phone numbers and discrete accounts, was that trust, when it is genuine, does not make a person blind. It makes a person patient. Patient enough to write things down, patient enough to seal envelopes, patient enough to wait 35 years in front of a classroom, building knowledge in layers so that when the examination finally arrived, she would not be cramming. She would be ready. I looked at my son, and I felt something I had not expected to feel in this room. Not haste, not triumph, but something closer to grief for the boy he had been, for the man I had believed he would become, for the distance between those two things that no document, no court proceeding, no forensic summary could ever fully measure. I said nothing. Some things do not require words. The seam had come apart without any help from me. The civil judgment was entered on a Thursday morning in early December. I was not in the courtroom when it happened. David Park had told me I did not need to be present for the final filing. The contested portion was long finished. The evidence had been submitted. The judge had reviewed everything Miss Bowie had prepared and everything Arthur had testified to, and everything Carolyn had confirmed when she carried the sealed envelope to the witness stand and opened it in front of the room and placed the promissory note flat on the surface, where it could be seen clearly by everyone who needed to see it. I was at home when David called. I was in the kitchen, making tea, the ordinary morning kind with no ceremony to it, just water and heat and the small ritual of a cup. "It's done," he said. "Full judgment in your favor. The promissory note is enforced as written. All fraudulent instruments are voided. The legal hold on your account is lifted. The court has ordered full restitution of the stolen funds, plus the costs of the forensic investigation." I thanked him. I finished making my tea. The criminal proceedings moved more slowly, as criminal proceedings do. That process belonged to other people now, investigators, prosecutors, the machinery of consequence that moves at its own pace and does not require my presence to operate. Daniel and Vivian had retained separate attorneys, as Vivian had requested in David's conference room on the morning the seam came apart. I did not follow the details closely. That was not my part of this story anymore. My part was the house on Phan Dinh Phung Street, and the altar in the front room, and the morning light that fell honestly across Min's photograph at a particular angle that had not changed in 32 years. I changed the water in the ceramic cup. I lit one stick of incense and watched the smoke rise straight and thin into the still air of the room. I thought about what I had, and what I had recovered, and what the difference was between those two things. The money mattered not because I needed luxury, but because it had been earned across a lifetime of 40-minute lessons and Sunday evenings at the kitchen table and 35 years of standing in front of students who needed someone to believe that their words mattered. That money was not abstract. It was time. It was the hours of a life given in a particular direction, stored carefully, meant for something. It was not meant to buy a diamond tennis bracelet for a woman I had met twice, but what I had recovered was not only money. I had recovered the house. The developer inquiry had been withdrawn once the power of attorney was voided. The dark green shutters Min had approved remained on their hinges. The window in the back bedroom stayed slightly open on rainy nights, as it always had. The altar stood in the front room where the light was honest, the way Min's mother had taught me it should stand. I had recovered the promissory note not as a piece of paper, but as proof of what I had already known. That I was not soft. That I was not confused. That the trust I had extended to my son had been real and deliberate and documented by a woman who had spent 35 years teaching the difference between words that were meant and words that were not. 2 weeks after the judgment, Carolyn came for dinner. She brought food, too much of it, the way she always does, 3 containers stacked in a bag, enough for 4 people when there were only 2 of us. We ate at the kitchen table with the fan going and the evening sounds coming through the open window, and we talked about things that had nothing to do with courts or forensic accountants or mediation sessions in 4th-floor conference rooms. We talked about a film she had seen, about a student we had both taught in different years who had become a journalist and written something worth reading. About the jasmine on the windowsill, which had bloomed again. Arthur Ngo came by on a Sunday morning, in his white shirt with the small collar, and sat in his usual chair, and drank his tea and said very little, which was exactly what was needed. When he left, he paused at the door the way he always did when he was about to say something he considered worth saying. "Miriam," he said, "you handled this the way Min would have wanted." I thought about that for a long time after he left. Min had been a precise man, an engineering professor who understood that structures hold because of what is built into them, not what is added on top. He had chosen a house for its bones. He had chosen a life for the same reason, built carefully, load-bearing in the right places, designed to hold weight without collapsing. He had chosen me. I sat in front of his photograph that evening, as the light shifted from afternoon to dusk, the way it does in December, earlier than you expect, the day folding quietly into itself. The incense had burned to ash. The ceramic cup held fresh water. His face in the photograph was the face of the anniversary year, the year he had laughed easily in Da Lat, before the illness, before the open window and the steady breathing and the ordinary last question about the stove. I thought about Daniel. Not with anger, the anger had done its work, and I had let it go the way you let a season go when it has finished. I thought about him the way you think about a building that did not hold, not with hatred for the building, but with a clear understanding of where the weakness was and what it had cost. I thought about what I would leave behind. Not to him. That had been answered by a judge in a courtroom on a Thursday morning in December, answered as clearly and permanently as anything I had ever written in my own handwriting. I thought about the notebook. The dark blue one with the hard cover, the one I had bought at the stationery shop on Dong Khoi Street on a Tuesday morning when I was also buying incense and rice, paying cash, looking like an old woman running ordinary errands. I had filled it, by the end, with 41 pages of evidence, and the notes of a woman who had not waited and had not panicked but had simply organized, sequenced, built her case the way she had always built everything steadily, in layers, until it was ready. I would leave the notebook to Carolyn, not because she needed it, but because she had been the keeper of the sealed envelope for 11 months without asking what was inside, and she deserved to know the full shape of what she had helped hold together. I would leave the house to no one yet. The house was mine. I was 68 years old and in good health, and the jasmine was blooming on the windowsill, and the dark green shutters were still exactly the color I had chosen 32 years ago, and the window in the back bedroom would stay slightly open on rainy nights for as long as I was here to leave it open. There was no hurry. Outside, the street sounds of Fan Dien Feng moved through the evening the way they always had: motorbikes, voices, the distant bell of a vendor making her last pass of the day. The city did not know or care what had been decided in a fourth-floor conference room or a courtroom on a Thursday morning. It continued, as it always continued. Indifferent and full. I was not indifferent. I was exactly where I had always been in this house, at this altar. In this life built bone by bone over 32 years with a man who had understood that everything worth keeping was built slowly and held quietly and defended not with force but with the simple, irrefutable weight of what was true. The incense ash was gray and still. Min's face watched from the honest light. My father used to say, "Still water runs deepest." He meant it about patience. He meant it about the kind of strength that does not announce itself, that simply holds what it holds, that does not need to raise its voice because it has already done what needed to be done, long before anyone else understood that the doing had begun. I had been still water my entire life. I was still water now. And I was not finished. If anyone has ever looked at you and seen only your age, your silence, your willingness to give and mistook all of that for weakness, this story was for you. The ones who stay quiet are not the ones who have nothing left. They are the ones who are still deciding exactly when to speak. If Miriam's story stayed with you, please give this video a like and subscribe so we can keep bringing you stories about the strength that lives in quiet places. And we'd love to hear from you. Do you believe that when someone truly loves you, they will always show it in the way they treat what you've worked your whole life to build?